Hello, everybody. Thank you so much for being here. We're going to be getting started in just a couple of seconds. We're going to kill a little bit of time, let folks come in from the waiting room, and then we will be kicking off with our session today. So sit tight, get comfortable. Really excited to have you here today. And I'll give us about 15-20 more seconds before we get started. Seeing a lot of folks coming in from that waiting room. Really excited to see you here today. And thank you in advance for your attention and your energy on this. I was going to say beautiful Wednesday, but for me, it's pouring rain outside. So maybe less beautiful, but beauty is in the eye of the beholder. So anyway, with that, I'm going to go ahead and get us started. Hello, everybody. My name is Brinton Botkin. I use she, her pronouns, and I lead student marketing here at Handshake. I am so excited to be with you today for this session. We know that launching your early career can be daunting, and we want to give folks tools to be successful in a wide variety of career paths. So this fall, we've been bringing in recruitment professionals in different industries and disciplines to answer your questions. Today's panelist is a sourcing lead from Epic Systems. She's going to share some tips and tricks for making a good impression with hiring professionals in today's job market. But before we get started with her, I'm just going to do some quick level setting. For the next 20 minutes or so, we'll be having a structured conversation, but you can feel free to submit your questions using the Q&A box down at the bottom of your screen. As a reminder, you won't be able to see any of the questions that are submitted until we mark them as answered. So please don't think we're like ignoring your question or you're just throwing it out into the universe. I promise we're seeing them. We'll try to get to as many as we can, but you won't start seeing them checked off until we get into the Q&A. Anything we don't answer today, we will use to prepare future events and content for you. And with that, Millie, do you want to get started? Do you want to introduce yourself and give a bit of background on you and your work with Epic?
Yeah, absolutely. Hi, everybody. I'm Millie. I also use she, her pronouns. And as Brenton said, I'm a recruiter and sourcing lead at Epic. A little bit about me, I focus on shaping our company's strategy on Handshake, as well as some other sourcing platforms out there, and also work really closely in driving some of our DEI initiatives. Aside from that, I actually graduated from UC Davis with a degree in political science and sociology and ended up in talent and recruiting, which wasn't something I planned, but it's definitely a career I'm passionate about. To give you some context on Epic as well. So we are a healthcare software company. If you've heard of MyChart, we're the company behind that application, but essentially we develop and implement the technology that hospitals and healthcare organizations use to manage patient data and a lot more. And we're also headquartered here in Madison, Wisconsin, on a campus that's honestly like an amusement park. So if you haven't already, I definitely encourage you to check out pictures of our campus on our social media.
Oh my gosh, I have scoped out the Epic campus and it truly lives up to its name. What an epic place to work. Thank you so much for your background and also love to see a fellow Aggie. If there are any UC Davis grads in the chat, you've got two of us here. Really excited to be with you today. So let's get into it. Let's kind of level set here. We know that every industry and even individual companies have their own kind of order of operations when it comes to recruiting. So do you mind giving us a walk through the kind of expected protocol for recruiting at Epic Systems?
Yeah, Epic's hiring process is super simple, super straightforward. Um, There are usually about 4 steps. It all starts with submitting an application through our careers page. That takes only a couple minutes. We don't require a cover letter. You really just have to give us some basic information and your resume. We wanted to make that process as accessible as possible with minimal barriers. So it's very easy. After that, most applicants get to learn about the role that they applied for through an informational phone call or a webinar. And after that, you complete a few assessments, and the final step is a virtual interview. And that's where you actually get to meet more of our team, get a deeper understanding of the role and of Epic as a whole. And all of this happens pretty quickly. That's something we hear from a lot of our candidates, is that we're the first to get back to them and set up an interview after they apply. So I definitely won't take too long, I promise.
Awesome. Love to hear it. Okay, so I've done a lot of these sessions over the course of this fall, and I've heard that one of the most important yet intimidating aspects to recruitment today is networking. So I'd love to hear if you have any advice to help students prepare for networking opportunities, making impactful connections. I know we're kind of heading into a break season, but there are a lot of opportunities throughout the rest of the year and even into 2025.
Yeah. A couple of different things here. I think the first thing I would say is to start early and be proactive. It's never too early to start networking, so get to know your professors, join student groups, show up at those career fairs and industry events. I think these are great ways to expand your knowledge and meet people who can guide you. The earlier you start, I also think it's easier to figure out which industries or career paths aren't for you, and that's often the easier thing to do than to find what you want to do. And then when you do have an understanding of, clear idea of where you want to go, you can focus on building meaningful connections with the right people. Networking is also not about asking someone to give you a job. So your goal with networking is to really get introduced to two more people. Say you meet me, we chat, you ask if I can introduce you to anyone in a certain field. I suggest a few contacts, you reach out, explain that I suggested you to connect, and you keep doing this, connecting, making new contacts, connecting some more. So that's really what networking is all about. The great thing is that if you're a student right now or even an alum, your school probably has a career center that's packed with resources like resume reviews, mock interviews, other workshops. So take advantage of those. They're there to help you prepare and even connect you with other alumni and professionals in your field. The last two things that I'll say is make the most of your online platforms. So set up a strong Handshake profile, LinkedIn profile, and that really highlights who you are and what you're interested in, and then use those platforms to connect with people. And you don't always have to focus on connecting with those that are, senior professionals. I think building connections with your peers and like young professionals can be just as important. So keep track of those conversations and follow up thoughtfully. So if you do meet with somebody, send a quick thank you note, let them know you appreciated the conversation, and stay in touch over time. Try to share an article or something meaningful that you had chatted about with them. I think that's a great way to keep that connection alive.
Those are such awesome tips. I love the concept of networking kind of up, across, and down over the course of your career. So you should be connecting with those peers. And I really appreciate you talking through that. Okay, you talked a little bit about Epic's kind of standard application process, and I'd love to get into some questions that I know a lot of the students in the chat will be thinking about, which is resumes. So what are your top tips for students to make a good first impression when it comes to their resume? And are there any common mistakes that you would want to warn people away from?
Yeah, there's a lot to share here. Not so much in terms of like the mistakes, but more so the tips. I think in general, a couple things to make your resume stand out. Definitely tailor it to each job that you're applying for. So have like a basic template and then customize your resume for each position by highlighting the most relevant skills or experiences. I think this shows that you've done your homework, that you're genuinely interested, and kind of gives employers an easy time to read your resume. Speaking of easy reading, keep it short, keep it focused. Try to stick to one page and focus on the most important and relevant information that you want to share. Again, employers can only spend a couple seconds scanning each resume, so make it short and sweet and avoid like too many buzzwords. Highlight accomplishments as opposed to your responsibilities. So we all understand that you did great work, but instead of listing just what you were responsible for, emphasize what you achieved by doing that. So if say you worked with content, you can say increase social media engagement by 30% in 6 months. I think that is much more powerful than saying managed social media accounts. So try to add some data to what you're saying in your resume. And then use a clean and professional format. Keep the design simple and easy to read. Avoid using too many like fonts or colors, and always submit it as a PDF. If you are interested in learning more of these tips and tricks, Epic is actually hosting resume workshops early next year in January and February. So you can come to those and we'll kind of flesh out all of these different things a lot more for you.
I love that, and what a cool resource. I know that my colleague just populated the links for those upcoming resume workshops in the chat, so be sure to go and register for those if that's something that are interested in. And I think that that would be a really beneficial opportunity, so thank you so much. Okay, we get a ton of questions about how to structure resumes when job seekers feel like they don't have a bunch of applicable industry experience or no work experience at all. Do you have any best practices for folks who might be facing this situation? Perhaps they haven't actually had a job yet, or they've worked potentially in the service industry or retail or something that they feel isn't necessarily connected to the job that they're applying to.
Yeah. I want to start by saying that it's normal to feel uncertain about structuring your resume, especially when you're lacking direct industry experience or any work history. That tends to happen if you're a new grad. I still think that there are a lot of effective strategies to showcase your potential, maybe instead of your experience. So in addition to some of the things that I mentioned before, you can differentiate, I think, start to understand your strengths, skills, and interests. So it's really important to understand the difference between the three of these things and be able to recognize those in yourself. So if you don't, it's going to be hard to convey them to others, put it on a paper, say it in interviews. So definitely take some time to do that introspection. Strengths would be the things that you're naturally good at. They're a little bit more intangible, they're harder to measure, but they do show results over time. So being detail oriented could be a strength. Skills, on the other hand, are things that you've actively learned. So these are more marketable. They're easily demonstrated. It's like speaking a second language or knowing a coding language. Um, and then for those skills, I would focus on the ones that are transferable. So focus on the skills you've gained through academics, volunteering, personal projects that really align with the job. I think leadership in student organizations is a great one. Teamwork, problem solving, these are all valuable examples that you can think about. I would also emphasize education and coursework. So if you're a student right now or a recent graduate, showcase your education pretty prominently. Try to highlight relevant courses that demonstrate knowledge in your field. I think for a field like computer science or software development, that can be really valuable to show those skills and the courses you've taken. And then the last thing, kind of going back to leadership, if you've engaged in any sort of extracurricular activities, highlight those leadership roles, talk about the sports that you played, volunteer experiences, or even club participation, and align that again with some sort of like professional competency. The other thing is if you're structuring it and you don't want to label it work experience, you can use a broader term like relevant experience and then kind of bunch all of these applicable activities under there. I think that's an easy way to reframe it for yourself.
I love it. Thank you. And were just speaking about strengths, skills, and interests. I would love to talk a little bit about some skills that maybe are commonly overlooked by candidates. So, are there any skills that you are specifically looking for in candidates at Epic that you think may be underrated or that candidates don't really think about when they're applying or interviewing?
Yeah, I think the first one that comes to mind is curiosity and initiative. I think there's a lot of, employers in this space that tend to think that those two skills aren't being thought of as much in today's time, especially with the introduction of AI and how that can make things super easy for you. So if you are somebody who can take the initiative to go beyond your assigned task and show like strong work ethic and a commitment to contributing to your organization's success, employers really love to be able to find those people that can be creative and think creatively about different problems, especially with limited resources. So I think you can kind of highlight instances where you made things work with what you had. Those really demonstrate a lot of initiative and curiosity and resilience. So that would definitely be something to think about. The other thing that I'm thinking of is this is a good term that I recently picked up, but it's called enterprise thinking. It's essentially being able to think about the big picture instead of just small, different projects. So being able to see how your individual task or your role fit into the bigger picture of a project or a company is kind of rare, but a very impactful skill to have. It shows that you're strategic, you're understanding the long-term impact. So even if it's something you don't necessarily have now without any experience, try to focus on that. It's something I'm still learning. So definitely think about that. The last skill I would mention here is learning and being an agile learner. Again, employers value candidates who can demonstrate their ability to learn new tools, systems, and this is really relevant in industries that evolve rapidly. So technology is, of course, something that is changing really quickly. So being an agile learner in that space can be really valuable.
I love that. Thank you so much. And I'd love to talk about kind of making it past the first application process. So I'm sure you engage in a lot of interview settings with candidates. What advice would you give for standing out to a recruiter during that first interview? So I'm going to preempt a common question as well, which is tips maybe for answering the question, tell me about yourself in an
Yeah.
interview, because I feel like sometimes folks are like, oh my God, how do I articulate exactly who I am in a quick soundbite? So if you have any advice there, would love to hear it.
Yeah, so for the first part, kind of just making a solid impression. Number one, research beyond the basics. So show the company that you've looked into them thoroughly. Try to understand their mission, what their values are, any like recent projects that they've worked on. I think this is, a very, very simple tip, but it does show your genuine interest and again allows you to tailor your responses to what that company is doing. Um, you can also then kind of tie in what you're saying about the company to your resume and to your research to give a well-rounded answer in interviews. I think that is a great way to show that you've done your homework. The second tip I would suggest is to turn the tables. Ask your interviewers creative questions, really give them something to think about. So at the end, when it's your turn, go beyond like the standard, what's the company culture like? Try to think of some like thoughtful or unique questions that make the recruiter reflect on their experience and give you something that's very candid too. Um, and I know we talked about strengths when it comes to building a resume. It's equally important to know how to talk about your own strengths and weaknesses in interviews. So many questions will ask you about those two things. So try to avoid framing a strength as a weakness, like I'm just a perfectionist or I just work too hard. I think it's really easy to see through that, and it comes across as not very authentic. Try to focus on areas that you are actually improving on. And I think that shows a lot of self awareness, again, initiative and ability to learn. Um, you can share a weakness and explain what you're doing to build that skill. Like I'm trying to get better at my public speaking skills and I am taking part in, XYZ. Ultimately, I think the aim with questions like that is to see how you handle challenges and adversity. So it's completely okay to be genuine and actually talk about a weakness. Be careful not to say a weakness that would, of course, be very impactful to the job that you're applying for. Like if it is a coding role and you're like, oh, I don't know anything about coding, like maybe refrain from saying something like that, but think thoughtfully about what you would like to say for those things. Um, and then for the second part, how to answer, tell me about yourself. I've always liked to break it into three chunks: the present, the past, and the future. So start with your current situation. If you're a student, an intern, you're involved in a campus organization, highlight your relevant responsibilities, your projects, your achievements. Then talk a little bit about your past, things that have shaped your experiences or your interests, such as your coursework, where you went to school, extracurricular activities. I think focus on those that are relevant to that opportunity. And then finish off by sharing your future. So, what career goals you have in mind, how your position aligns with them. So, again, kind of showing enthusiasm and tying it all together.
I love it. Such great advice. And I really appreciated your insight about the strengths and weaknesses because I do think that's such a great opportunity to show a growth mindset and show a learner's mindset. I know you mentioned that that's an underrated skill that applicants kind of don't think about
Yeah.
necessarily. And so demonstrating that as, this is a weakness, but here are the things that I'm doing to improve in that area, I think is a really amazing way to demonstrate that in an interview setting. So thank you. Okay, before we get into the Q&A, which we, reminder to everybody that you can submit your questions down at the bottom. We've already gotten some good ones. I do have a couple of rapid fire questions for you, Millie. And so just give a quick response. You can give a little line about why you think that if you feel so inclined. But let's get into it. So, cover letter, yes or no?
For Epic, no. Again, it depends on the company. Some require them, but I don't think that they're necessary.
Okay. Let's get into another hot topic. Thank you note after an interview, yes or no?
Yeah, I think that's a sweet gesture to have. I think going back to the networking piece, it's nice to just send a little quick note expressing appreciation. So I would say yes to that. And I respond to all my thank you notes, so I love to get them.
Awesome. Okay, reaching out to a recruiter after submitting an application, good idea or unnecessary?
Again, for Epic, I would say unnecessary. We look at all of our applications, so it's okay if you don't reach out to us to let us know that you've submitted something. We're going to look at it regardless. But again, it depends on the company. If you need to, then go ahead, but unnecessary in my opinion.
Fabulous. Thank you so much. Okay, let's get into some of these questions. Here's a really good one that I think might call back to some of the questions that you've already answered, but I think maybe we can expand on it a little bit. Do you have any general advice for those who feel that their strength is in their interviews, but struggle to get a foot in the door to actually get that interview? So maybe somebody who's feeling like they're applying a lot, but not actually getting a bite from a recruiter, so that they can shine in their actual interview process. Do you have any advice there?
Yeah, I mean, again, that's a very common struggle that folks face, and I was in the job searching mode myself, a couple years ago. I think what really helps then is to understand what your barriers are at that time. So sometimes it's valuable to take a step back from just applying to really understand, what am I trying to do here? What are my goals with this application process? What kind of jobs do I really want? And then go back to some of those job search platforms and find people that are already in positions that you envision yourself in, and go talk to them. See what they did. Maybe they have some suggestions for you to brighten up your application or your resume. Maybe there's a key piece that you're missing that you'll get to learn from them. So talk to those people. They have a lot of experience. They, again, speaking of networking, may be able to connect you with some other people that can also give you great insight or get your foot in the door. So I think it's when you feel overwhelmed and you feel maybe like you're not getting in anywhere, take a step back and just try to learn a little bit more about what you're doing and go from there.
Thank you so much. Okay, and I will also say, putting on my handshake hat and calling back to a piece of advice that you had earlier around your career center at school, that if you're feeling like you can't look objectively at your own resume or you're really like not able to identify where you might be struggling in your application materials, it's a really great opportunity to go to your career center, have a third party kind of take a look at things, give you some objective feedback about your resume, your application materials. Take advantage of that place while you have it if you're still in school, because I did not take enough advantage of it when I was in school.
No,
Uh,
same here, and I wish I
Good.
did. The other key thing is a lot of schools typically tend to extend their services for alumni a couple years after you graduate too. So make sure you ask your career center about that as well.
Yes, love that. Okay, I would like to call back to another thing you mentioned earlier, which is asking really thoughtful questions in an interview to show that you've done your homework. We have somebody who's asking for some creative questions to ask an interviewer during an interview. Do you have any favorites that you've been asked by candidates, or any advice for
Um,
how you can come up with a really good question?
yeah, I think I Somebody asked me once, like, what's my favorite thing to eat here, like at Epic or like in Madison? And, I think it's just a very personable question. It kind of goes beyond it breaks down the power dynamic a little bit. I think it goes beyond talking about just work. You get to know somebody a little bit more. So I really like that question. I think it made me think because I wasn't expecting that. I was probably expecting them to ask me about their 401k or something like that. So I really enjoyed that one. Um, I think I've also gotten questions of people to tell me how I got to Epic and what my application process looked like. I think that's another great way to give the interviewer a chance to reflect on their own journey, and they may share tidbits that are valuable for you to kind of take in as well. So I would say those are two good ones, but I'm sure there's tons more out there that you could kind of create a bank of too.
Love it. Thank you. Do you have any suggestions for folks networking online? I know you mentioned making sure that you have a really robust handshake profile and you're engaging in those spaces. Do you have any additional suggestions for how to go about networking online?
Yeah, I think keep a journal. If you are reaching out to a lot of people, again, not everybody will respond to you. So if you are trying to just reach out to strangers and connect with them professionally. It's okay if, the first couple of tries don't go, don't result in anything, but keep a journal, try to reach out to as many people as possible. See, have they accepted my request? Have I talked to them? Have I set up a phone call or a coffee chat? I think keeping that journal can be a good way to stay organized and really be, again, thoughtful about who you're engaging with. Um, the other thing I would say is, like, sometimes when you're networking, it helps to already see something on their profile that you connect with or that drew you towards their profile, and add that in like the first message or the note or the connection request. I think that can also really stand out. For instance, if I ever get a connection request and somebody's like, I'm also from UC Davis, I think that immediately compels me a little bit more to, look into that and talk to them more. So I think try to set yourself apart, right? If somebody is in a senior position, they're probably already getting a lot of connections like yours. So set yourself apart in some way by finding a similar thing that you connect with them on.
Love it. Thank you. Okay, we have a couple of different threads I want to tug on. I'm going to try and do these justice. One is related, there's a couple of questions that are about kind of overcoming adversity in your application process and kind of navigating talking about that. So we have somebody who's wondering if it's too personal in an interview to talk about overcoming health challenges and how that's influenced your approach to work, learning opportunities and introspection. We have another question that's more around addressing gaps in a resume. Do you have any kind of advice in those areas?
Yeah, for personal questions, I think share what you feel comfortable with. I don't walk away from an interview feeling like you overshared or you mentioned something that you don't feel comfortable with. So going into that, think about what it is that you'd be willing to share and how you can share that in a nice package. So definitely think about, what I'm planning on sharing and does this make sense to share? Will it add to my application? And what's the best way I can deliver this to? For one, I think, times are changing. I don't mind getting to know my candidates on a slightly more personal level than just professional. I think as a recruiter as well, one of my jobs is to be able to effectively guide candidates through the process. So sometimes knowing about their issues, they have a midterm coming up, helps me be a little bit more understanding of their timelines as well. So kind of read the room a little bit, see, who's on the other end, how receptive they would be to something like that, and then share accordingly. So it's definitely, I can't say it's like a yes or a no. It's definitely a little bit situational. And of course, depending on what your adversity is, it can change. For like gaps in resume, I think it's very similar. Think about how can I deliver this in a way that will be the most impactful and is going to get the answer across. Employers may ask you about it, so be prepared. Don't be surprised. Don't act defensively. Just be honest, be authentic about it. I think that's the best way to approach that.
I love it. Such great advice. Thank you. Okay, kind of in a completely different vein, we have somebody who is clearly a freshman who's looking for advice for searching for summer internships for the first time. Are there any helpful resources, platforms, or strategies that you would recommend for finding great opportunities that align with their interests?
Yeah, I mean, for platform and handshake is great. I think especially for um, opportunities for students, I think it's great. So definitely scour the handshake interface there. In terms of other tips, again, be thoughtful about where you're applying to. Most places, if they're hiring interns, they're hoping that you would be able to come back and join them full time. So they're gonna be more interested in getting you on board as an intern if they see that you could contribute to the company in the long term as well. So make sure that if you're applying to the internship, it goes a little bit beyond just the 3 months that you may be spending with them. You're really thinking about the long term and working with X company could align with my future career goals. I'm really passionate about what the company is doing. Still try to make a connection and meaningful connection with where you're applying to as well.
Awesome. Okay, we have a couple of different questions in the flavor of building confidence as an applicant, as an interviewer. I know we only have a couple minutes here, so maybe that's a good note for us to wrap it up on. But how does one stay confident during the interview process, especially if they struggle with nerves or anxiety around
Yeah.
speaking? Do you have any tips for just confidence building?
I would say this, my team lead, when I first started at Epic and I was really nervous about a meeting that I was having with some stakeholders, I was nervous and I went to his office and he was like, you know what? They're just people. Like they're just humans too. And I think that can be really hard to sometimes internalize, but try to see beyond that power dynamic and be like, this is just another person. And for me, that does help cut down the nerves a little bit. Um, I think practice also makes perfect. So if you are planning to interview and you're nervous, try to, practice some common questions that they may ask you so that when they do ask you, you have a little bit of something to kind of get the gears going. And then, after you start speaking a little bit, you loosen up and it kind of um, oils the greases, oils, oh my gosh, I know what I'm trying to say, greases the
Greases the
gears a
wheel.
little
Yeah.
bit and then gets you going. So try doing that. I think those are, practice and take your mind away from that like power dynamic.
Yeah, I love it. And I'll do another plug. If you still have access to a career center, they often have mock interviews that are
Yes.
available to help kind of build that repetition and kind of build your interviewing muscle and gain that confidence. Thank you so much, Millie. We have gotten so many questions that we didn't have the chance to answer, a lot of which are focused on resumes. So I will encourage folks again to visit that chat and look at those epic opportunities that are going to be coming up in the spring for resume workshops because I think that's a really, really cool opportunity. So thank you, Millie, for sharing your wisdom with us today. We're so excited to everybody in the audience to bring you more of these types of events in the future. So please be sure to take 30 seconds to fill out our feedback survey in the chat so we know that what you want to see from us in the future. And in the meantime, be sure to check out our events page to see upcoming recruiter workshops and more, and also other events like the ones hosted by Epic that are curated just for you and available to you on Handshake. So, with that, thank you so much and have a great rest of your week.
Thank you.
Bye. Thanks.